There are rumors in the martial arts world that the back row is by the window, the hometown of the king, and the back row is by the window, making it unparalleled in the world. As a resident of the rear seat by the window, Yinyue feels ashamed of the kings in the rear seat by the window. After all, not everyone has the chance to become a big villain who is determined to win 4 consecutive championships in the American Youth Trials and then poach the little guy from Lihai University to achieve 3 consecutive championships, only to be tricked into working as a laborer in youth. A rational female lead stock buying essay that doesn't mind the big picture despite watching the excitement. The plot starting from the animation OVA, which is the first day of little Haidai entering Tachibana, is mainly based on the plot of the manga keywords of the novel. No pop-up window after the Prince of Tennis, no pop-up window after the Prince of Tennis. Download the complete set of TXT, and read the latest chapter on the Prince of Tennis. Chapter 1. First grade of Lihai University Affiliated Middle School. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. First grade of Lihai University Affiliated Middle School. The sudden and hurried footsteps broke the tranquil morning, and the owner of the footsteps jumped onto the monument of the century-old Affiliated High School of Lihai University in an extremely agile posture, shouting excitedly, "Starting from today, I am also the first grade of Lihai University Affiliated High School. I want to enter the first tennis club in the country. I want to become the first." It was a statement that made anyone feel arrogant, but when it came out of the child's mouth, it gave people a sense of anticipation. The originally calm school gate was stirred up by the child's roar, and a few cherry blossoms in the treetops were also awakened. The dew accumulated in the stamens hung down, scattering mist and mist standing under the tree. Upon careful consideration, the endless trivialities that followed began from this moment on. This restless little ghost Wu Yin silently looked up and wiped away the dew from his head. The supervising committee member who assisted on the side quickly stepped forward and shouted, "This student, if you want to be the first, you can't stand on top." I'm sorry. The child with a baby fat face smiled and touched the back of his head, leaping down from the school monument, apologizing repeatedly. He is actually a very cute child, with a messy head of hair that he doesn't even want to cut, and a pair of round green pupils. His lively face easily gives people a sense of joy. The child laughed happily and hopped away heartlessly. Wu Yin silently looked at the back of the child, lifting his chin slightly. The supervisory committee member slowly walked up to the point where the mist had disappeared, carefully observing the expression of the young girl. After confirming that the latter was not angry with the boy's words, they said, "President, he just said he wants to join the tennis department and become the first." Wu Yin stretched his tone and slowly narrowed his eyes, yawning. "I'll help you ask if Yukimura has agreed. Every year, there are a few children who overestimate their abilities, but, no need, the supervisory committee member immediately shook his head. But if he wants to join the tennis department, then it's like you're in charge, right?" Wu Yin took care of the armband on his left shoulder and lazily murmured, "Why did you make the tennis department sound like a triad?" "At most, I was just a nanny pulled to work as a free laborer, and judging from his carefree nature, only Makita could possibly manage it, right? Although they can manage it, only they know how many twists and turns there are in between. Every year, there are a few children who overestimate their abilities, but without such children, school life would be extremely boring." Wu Yin squinted his eyes and seemed to notice something. His gaze slowly turned towards the distant terrace. On the terrace on the second floor, the tall and beautiful woman's gaze relaxed as she slowly looked at the girl who was still standing at the school gate and didn't look like a person. She then turned her gaze to the school monument, smiling and jokingly saying, "That stone has been here since the establishment of Lihai University, witnessing the storms of many young people in Lihai. This is the first time a first-grade child has stepped on it. This step really hits the heart of our old principal." The person behind him silently said, and quickly added, "What is her standing posture?" The beauty was momentarily stunned, and soon realized that Jintian didn't care about the child who spoke wildly. He was referring to the girl standing at the school gate on duty but leaning on the tree trunk due to drowsiness. Although Wu Yinshuyu also comes from a noble family, she has always been very free-spirited and does not quite deal with the strict family tradition of Gentian. Although Wu Yin, Yukimura, and Sanada grew up together, they all had outstanding appearances, superior family backgrounds, and intelligent talents, but their personalities were completely different, and they did not see each other as the opposite sex. In elementary school, in order to exercise her body and prevent her from curling up in the bedroom playing games until she got moldy, Wu Yin's family forcibly carried her to a tennis interest class. Originally, they only wanted Wu Yin to bask in the sun more, but unexpectedly, Wu Yin became restless and amazed. She didn't even bother to swing with the children in the interest class. She turned around and found several older children to fight, so she became acquainted with Yukimura, who was training in the participating class next to the interest class. Later, during the process of participating in the competition, she met Makita again. Now, despite various setbacks, friendship has been maintained for 9 years. Later on, the trio met Lu Lian and others, and the excellent people would always gather together by chance. The scale of their peers grew larger and larger. Even after enrolling in the affiliated high school of Lihai University, Wu Yin, who could have become a superstar in the women's tennis department, was abducted to become a financial supervisor in the men's tennis department, which is also enviable. It used to be strange that so far, this group of excellent people have not been arguing with each other, and there are no signs of mutual liking. It should be noted that Wu Yin, who has a father of German ancestry, is also a famous elf-type beauty. Not only is there nothing at all, but the feeling of disgust is still increasing day by day. For example, now, Wu Yin can even be picked out by Jintian when standing. Yukimura, accustomed to the conflict between the two, only chuckled lightly and shook his head. As long as Fu Yin can't hear, he'll just pretend nothing happened. Fu Yin, who had been harmed by Feng Ping, felt a slight itching in her nose and squinted her eyes in dissatisfaction, showing a provocative expression towards the terrace. The family rules of the Sanada family are so strict that they are infuriating. Previously, they were forced to stay at his dojo for half a month, but from the second day on, they tried their best to climb over the wall and escape. Now, thinking about it, it's really suffocating atmosphere. Fortunately, they are not classmates in the same class. Among the tennis department's top picks, the ones in Class B who are also in the same class as Wu Yin are Renwang Yaji and Marui Wentai. Although Renwang is not a serious person, Marui Wentai is particularly cute, and none of them are diligent and disciplined, so they get along very well. I thought this morning was just a small episode of the new semester, but when the afternoon work began, Hulang Sangyuan spoke up and said, "There really is such a bold person who jumped the Colonel's steel in front of Wu Yin. Please don't tease me." Wu Yin too, who was still busy planning the use of last year's national championship prize money, reminded him without lifting his head. "Hey! Do you even know that?" Marui Bunata stretched lazily, holding a spoon in his mouth. "But this kid's drive is really nostalgic. He should be a type that Yuki really likes. Please don't tease me." Wu Yin repeated a sentence, just watching the numbers on the ledger getting more and more incorrect. After reconciling the accounts repeatedly, he was puzzled and said, "The 300,000 yen reward from last year's champion, although some was used for equipment maintenance, is not only that little left. It's strange that the accounts don't match at all." Halfway through, her eyes suddenly filled with murderous intent. Who bought these 500 tennis balls? End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Youth. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Youth. Hulang silently turned his head away. Marui Wentai immediately had an answer in her heart and said, "It should be Vice Minister, right? His practice method is already very ball-intensive, and he will have to use 3 serving machines to practice at the same time starting this semester. Buying more will save him from stopping midway to wait for the first grade to pick up the ball, right? Kala, Wu Yin's face remained expressionless, and the pen in his hand was forcefully broken into two pieces, creating a faint black aura that rose into the air. Just a moment. She turned around, her voice calm and frightening. I'll go chat with Xintian. Wu Yin, please calm down. Hu Lang quickly grabbed Wu Yin's collar with his eyes and hands, and Marui Wentai also firmly hugged her arm, reminding a fact. You can't beat Vice Minister Yinyue. Please don't worry, I'm super calm now. I'm going to extinguish his 5 senses. You haven't even calmed down. And you don't even know how to extinguish the 5 senses. Don't worry, there are always 1 or 2 pills that have the same effect. No way, the deputy minister still needs to win 3 consecutive championships. Marui Wentai was about to persuade him to tears, but in the end, Wu Yin first realized that he couldn't break free from Hu Lang's arm, then realized that Yukimura must be on the side of Sanada in this matter, and finally realized that he might not be able to defeat Sanada. Wu Yin stopped his rampage, regained his senses, looked at Marui, and asked, by the way, can he already use 3 serve machines? Anyway, 2 machines are already enough, Hu Lang replied. In that case, would the school be more accepting? The tennis club, which has entered the national competition for several consecutive years, is recognized as the wealthiest club in the school, but this time there is nothing left after deducting the team uniform cost of new members. How to explain the fact that I emptied my pocket on the first day of school? Wu Yin shook his head and frowned slightly. Moreover, with the price of these balls added, the total number is still not quite right. Marui Wentai looked at the notebook in her hand and couldn't help but complain, just looking at these things is a headache. Sure enough, the minister made a super wise decision to bring Yuki to the tennis department to work as a finance officer. The mist let out a faint sigh. She is at least a prominent figure, why does everyone think that being poached by Yukimura is just a small financial figure? And if Yukimura were really the kind of person who would let her friends abandon their talents to assist her, neither she or Makita would maintain a 9-year friendship with him. Wu Yin put down her notebook, which was filled with data, turned around and picked up a stack of paper. After weighing it a bit, she looked around and changed the topic. The number of new students joining this year has tripled compared to last year. However, looking around, it seems that they are a bit out of touch with you. Most of them sign up for fame, and they should leave in less than half a month. Marui Wentai had anticipated this for a long time, eagerly searching through the crowd and muttering excitedly, hey! Didn't the child who jumped the school monument this morning come? Wu Yin also remembered the cute seaweed head, and the fighting words seemed to be more than just a child who could talk big. Such a passionate and confident child seems to be not following the rules, please make sure to wait for him. After the mist disappeared, the black air rose up again, and there seemed to be a hint of strangeness in the calm and peaceful expression. Only a heartless little devil like him can be so angry with guys like Xintian. You are absolutely capable of making Vice Minister Xintian angry. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Chichiya Chihara. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Chichiya Chihara. Wu Yin was almost eager to see through before seeing the figure hurriedly rushing over. He still looked not very smart. Although the words, Tennis Department Admissions Office, were right above his head, he didn't look up and anxiously wandered around. His messy short hair was also soaked in thin sweat, and he anxiously muttered, where exactly is it? You should take a closer look around. Wu Yin was even more looking forward to the way Xintian met him. Marui Wentai's eyes lit up as she took out her application for admission and walked up to her, smiling as she asked, are you looking for this? The child suddenly showed a sigh of relief and hurriedly took the paper. Hu Lang walked up friendly and reminded, you can submit the application for joining the company later. Hurry up and change into sportswear and practice swinging with everyone. Swinging. Did you make a mistake? The child became excited again, showing off the momentum of jumping on the school monument in the morning. A pair of round eyes glared at the boss, I want to compete with the top-ranked guy here, I want to become the first one right away. Ah, in that case. Of course, not a problem. Wu Yin responded super quickly, with a hint of joy on his calm face, as if waiting for his words. The gentle attitude of the beautiful senior sister immediately won the child's favor and stirred up his memories. She immediately opened her pure white teeth and smiled at Wu Yin, saying, "You are the senior sister standing at the door this morning. My memory is good." And he didn't look at me at the time. Wu Yin felt that his decision was becoming increasingly correct. Marui Wuntai's face turned pale and he said, "But Yuki, this." Wu Yin extended her slender fingers and stirred her drooping hair slightly, revealing a hint of playfulness in her eyes. Her tone carried a hint of meaning. "What's the matter?" Although she is only a sophomore, Wu Yin has gained a lot of respect in the men's tennis department with her courage, and she also has a certain say in the background with Masuda Yukimura. Now she is speaking up, and Marui Wuntai, who was already curious about the child's strength, only symbolically stopped her and enthusiastically pulled the jackal towards the tennis department. The child's name is Chihara, and there are already many worn-out areas on his small hands. When writing the name, the handwriting is so ugly that it makes Wu Yin, who is watching on the side, feel a heartache. Although it looked unreliable no matter what, after the child entered the field, his eyes became sharp and his skills were extremely agile. Several aggressive third-grade seniors who had participated in national competitions had already lost several in a row. Wu Yin stood by the sidelines, his hands wrapped around his chest, watching the disastrous defeat of third grade with ease. However, as if he had already anticipated it, he calmly played with the wooden bead bracelet on his wrist. The senior students in the third grade were originally average in level, but this year they were a bit carried away by Yukimura and others. In addition, the busy academic workload in the third grade made them even more careless in practice. It doesn't matter. Upon careful consideration, if Xiaoqi is also well trained, even if there is no third grade, the main candidates for this year's national competition can still make it together. Marui Wuntai pulled the jackal up to her side, his eyes eager to try, and whispered, "He won every game, even though his opponent is just a senior in third grade. There will be more opportunities to fight him in the future. Don't pick a time like this when you will definitely be punished." Wu Yin gently shook her head and decisively stood aside, gesturing for the two to look back. In that direction, three figures are slowly approaching. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. I am looking at the future's aces. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. I am looking at the future's aces, what? Actually, it's easy to become first. Chihara Akira also tapped his back with his racket, looking disappointed at the exhausted members lying on the ground. At this moment, a serious voice exploded like thunder at the entrance of the tennis court. "What are you arguing about?" The tall figure walking at the forefront is undoubtedly the deputy head of the tennis department at Tachibana University, Makita. His family has a strict family tradition, and the 3 generations of single-handed swordsmanship samurai give their men a calm and confident aura. Now that he arrives, the once noisy tennis department is instantly silent. Behind Jintian, a slightly shorter young man with short iris hair slowly approached. He was very soft-looking, with a faint smile on his lips. The team uniform he had chosen was draped over his shoulders, adding a profound and mysterious feeling to him. Behind him was a gentle and jade-like young man, with light steps and drooping eyes, clean as an independent water lily. The 3 of them have completely different auras, but they are all wearing the tennis department's official team uniform. Here we are. Wu Yin and Marui Hulang exchanged a glance and tacitly retreated to the back of the crowd. Jintian looked seriously at the people gathered together, and in the end, his gaze fell on Chihara Akira, who had not yet had time to change into his team uniform. He asked, "Why did the newcomer over there leave the team without permission?" "You ask me what I'm doing. I know it all by looking at it. Just now, I've become the number 1 in this club," said Chihara Akira, who couldn't see the situation clearly in an instant, a quieter atmosphere slowly rose up than before. However, being the number one in the country is not a big deal. I thought it would be a bit stronger, said Chichiya in disappointment, a model of death. With a light smile, Yukimura broke the eerie silence at the scene and said, "It looks like we need to give this kid a little lesson." His words have always been accepted by everyone, especially after this ignorant child just spoke wildly. Wu Yin caressed Mu Zhu and looked thoughtfully at Yukimura, who had walked lightly to the center of the field. He said softly, "Hey. Even Jingshi wants to hit him, it's really a rare revenge physique." Marui Wuntai chuckled and said, "If you have a gruesome physique, who can compare to you? But won't Takayuki stop him? That child is very pitiful. Is it just starting to be interesting?" Wu Yin deliberately tugged at the corner of his eye, pretending to be Makida's fierce expression, and said fiercely, "Moreover, saying that being the number one in the country is not that big of a deal, even I want to hit him." Marui Wuntai suppressed his smile, but Hu Lang couldn't see that Wu Yin was deliberately provoking trouble. He shook his head helplessly, sighed, and said, "I really don't want to go against you. It's creepy." Wu Yin remained silent, and another voice came from outside the fence behind him. "If he looks down on the tennis court, he said it himself. Of course he has good confidence, but if he doesn't have the mastery, he will only be hit hard and bleed. Whether he can hold on to the next game is still a question." Wu Yin turned around and calmly looked at the person behind him. "Lu Sheng, do you think so?" Lu Sheng, who was also the primary choice for the tennis department of the student union and a gentleman who was popular among countless girls, silently lifted his glasses and asked, "What about you? Have you been watching good movies all along? How could that be?" "I'm very serious." Wu Yin slowly lowered her head, her hands playing with Mu Zhu becoming increasingly addicted. "What I'm looking at is the ace of the future." End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Red and White Faces. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Red and White Faces. The result of the game was obvious. The three of them didn't even use their ultimate moves, and just by receiving and serving the ball, they had already beaten Xiaoqi, who was still arrogant just now, to pieces. The child knelt on the ground, supporting his body with both hands, panting heavily, and sweat continuously sliding down his forehead. The other members of the tennis department dared not make a sound and looked at each other, afraid that they would become the next outlet. Yukimura and Ryu only gave the child an educational tap, but Makita was very serious and even used the level of training ordinary team members at super-normal times, which rubbed Akira's confidence back and forth on the ground. "That's too harsh." The silence around was slowly broken by whispers, and Akira also fiercely touched her tears. She grabbed her tennis racket and stubbornly bit her lower lip. Her fair cheeks were already flushed with anger and shame. Marui Wuntai was also aware of this sense of defeat, and squeezed forward from the crowd, whispering, "Are you okay? Stop talking too much." Akira suddenly shook off his racket, and the edge of the racket almost brushed against Marui Wuntai's nose. However, he didn't care at all and ran towards the outside of the tennis court without looking back. Wu Yin looked helplessly at the departing figure, but before she could speak, a murmur began to linger in her ear. "I was so arrogant just now, why are you running so fast now?" First-grade kids still want to emulate Yukimura and the others. "It's hilarious." Echoes echoed one after another, but a leisurely female voice suddenly sounded, "When they were in third grade just now, if you had this momentum, you wouldn't have been punished for running circles, would you?" The people around him who knew they were wrong were speechless, and with a sharp look in his eyes, he let out a majestic roar. "What are you all doing here? If you have so much free time, go run 20 laps immediately." One by one, their figures hurriedly ran past, gradually revealing the mist hidden behind them. She stirred her hair just over her shoulder, looking at the three giants staring at her, her clean and clear eyes filled with innocence. "Ah no, Yukimura looked at her with a faint smile that added a touch of gentleness. So, have you been here all this time? Wu Yin closed her eyes and couldn't help but pull on the wooden bead on her wrist, admitting, it should be considered true. Yukimura let out an "oh" and smiled even more brightly. This farce has been going on for so long, and Aki seems to be very happy watching it. He doesn't want to stop it at all. Stop it. Wu Yin stopped spinning the wooden bead and nodded solemnly. If we were to stop it, last year when you challenged the senior, I should have held your legs and begged you to calm down. It seemed that he had thought of the awkward scene of Wu Yin, who had always been proud, kneeling and hugging his legs. Makita silently turned his head to one side, pretending to stare at the staff running circles. Wu Yin lit his chin and shrugged helplessly, we just started school. Could you please do it one by one? Is it troublesome? Lu Liena repeated with a slight doubt. Of course. Wu Yin wrapped her hands around her chest, and her gaze fell faintly on the two guys who were already half a head taller than her. My childhood was for practicing basketball, and I had 5 regular picks. Throughout the summer, I didn't even see a shadow, so I was left to attend a month-long tutoring class alone. Now I even beat my child to tears. If he really runs away, who should I go to? The part of Zheng Xian who was still running in circles in the distance sneezed fiercely. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Game Hall. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Game Hall. In the Game Hall. It has been 3 days since he suffered a disastrous defeat in the tennis department, and Chihara always holds his breath, unwilling to turn back and admit defeat. Anyway, I didn't get the loss that he was from that group of guys. Chihara Akira constantly comforted himself, but his frustrated mood made it impossible for him to concentrate. At this moment, the game character he was manipulating was eliminated by an online opponent's move. Looking at the game page that had turned gray, Chihara Akira angrily threw her backpack aside and said, "Damn it. I even lose playing video games." So many days have passed, and not a single person from the tennis department has come to find him. Do you really want him to go soften first? It's too embarrassing, children. Suddenly, a female voice appeared in my ear, with a unique smoky voice and a sense of effortless laziness. In the tennis department, even if the first choice only focuses on playing games and fails to meet the score, they are not allowed to participate in the competition. Chihara Akira was also taken aback for a moment, turned her head, and saw the beautiful senior who had taken him to the tennis department before appear next to her. She bent down and looked at herself, with slightly long bangs and double pupils, clean and lazy. Despite full of anticipation, Chihara Akira still turned around awkwardly, lifted her head, and proudly lifted her chin, saying, "I have to say it first, I won't join the tennis club." "I didn't let you join the tennis club." Wu Yin gently tugged at Chihara Chia's ear and pulled his head back, pointing solemnly at the red-haired boy standing behind him. "I just want to remind you that waving the senior's face with a racket and the senior cares for you with kindness is a very bad behavior." Chihara Akira also blinked, looking at the seemingly kind senior. Suddenly, he remembered that a few days ago, after being killed by a flash sale, only this senior ran over the crowd to care about him. However, he was still angry at the time, so he had forgotten about what he had done. "Yes, I'm sorry." Chihara Akira also touched the back of her head, her face quickly covered in a blush. Marui Wentai and Hu Lang, who had been searching for people for 3 days, finally breathed a sigh of relief and waved their hands casually. They smiled freely and said, "It's okay, it's okay. It's just that although your tennis skills are good, your gaming skills are average." As he spoke, he proudly pointed to a machine on the other side of the game hall, where the winning page contrasted sharply with the black and white failure page in front of Chihara Akira. "Although I took the opportunity to play a game, it was much easier to accompany Wu Yin every day to find children than to train." Che Yuan Chi pouted in defiance, but in the end, he couldn't bear it anymore. He clenched his fists and asked awkwardly, "They're all in second grade. What exactly is their origin? Indeed, I am still not convinced. Hu Lang smiled and said, those people who are competing with you. Oh, it's a bit strange to chat in this place. Why don't we go eat cake? Marui Wentai's expression moved and he pulled his partner's arm, his smile becoming incredibly cute. He looked at Chihara Akira, tilted his head, and then continued, don't worry, it's our treat. We'll pay next month. After he finished speaking, he looked at Wu Yin very happily and said, there's a restaurant I've been wanting to eat for a long time, but it's just too expensive. The moon. You're obviously just trying to grab something to eat. And acting spoiled is also too foul, isn't it? Wu Yin lowered his head slightly and touched his wallet. Okay. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Goal is the Three Giants. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Goal is the Three Giants. Under the leadership of Wentai Marui, the four of them walked into a well-decorated dessert shop. They randomly ordered small and exquisite desserts among the prices that were so expensive that Chihara Akira almost wanted to break out of the door. Soon, the entire table was filled with small and exquisite desserts. Looking at Chihara Chiya, who didn't even dare to pick up a spoon, Marui Wentai comforted him with great magnanimity, it's okay, it's okay. Mizuki is the woman who holds the financial power. Wu Yin let out a light sigh and looked at Marui Wentai, who was busy and happy. He could only tolerate it and said, after eating so much, Marui, please prepare for tomorrow's training. Being able to eat this, I am also willing to do it. Marui Wentai happily bit the spoon and looked at the pastry in front of him, feeling a bit unsure for a moment. Hu Lang reluctantly took on the task of leading the topic to the right track and asked, you just asked, who are those people in second grade? Chihara Akira nodded. Upon hearing this, Hu Lang took out a newspaper from his backpack and spread it out in front of him. In the column reporting on the championship of the National High School Tennis Competition, he pointed to the magnified photo, on which stood a row of third-grade students who had been beaten to tears by Chihara Akira a few days ago. Meanwhile, Yukimura and his three companions squatted at the front, except for Masuda, who was full of displeasure. They all laughed happily. Listen up, it was these three people who led Lihai University affiliated middle school to successfully win the national championship last year. Hu Lang introduced one by one while speaking. Lu is a master, Yukimura is the son of the gods, and Makita is also known as the emperor. The three of them are collectively known as the Three Giants of the Tachibana Tennis Department. These nicknames are becoming more and more exaggerated, but they sound enough to scare a whole crowd. Wu Yin nodded silently, but heard that Chihara Akira also turned her attention to her and asked, Senior sister, are you the manager of the tennis department? No, it's not. Wu Yin didn't know how to describe his identity yet, and Marui Wentai answered with a cake in her mouth. There is no coach in the tennis department. The senior students are trained with Minister Yukimura as the core and Lu's plan as the standard, under the supervision of Makita. However, in the first year, some of them joined the tennis department because they were interested, and there is no foundation at all. It is the kind of tennis department where Yoshiyuki takes them to get started. Although he also helps with many financial matters, in the end, Yoshiyuki should be considered a coach, right? Wu Yin nodded indifferently, then looked at Chihara Chiya, who had already eaten a lot, propped up his chin and reminded him lightly, they are willing to fight with you until they are exhausted, so they should also be interested in your quality. How can this be enough? Chihara Akira bit off the last bite of kesong in his hand and clenched his fist. I want to knock down all three of them. After he finished speaking, he grabbed his bag and rushed out with high spirits. Before leaving, he didn't forget to bring 2 chocolate pies, leaving Marui Wentai and Hu Lang looking at each other in surprise for a moment. Is that kid serious? Wu Yin remained elegant and calm, slowly stirring his hot chocolate and saying, he looks very similar to Makita 2 years ago. Is it really fake? Marui Wentai suddenly widened his eyes. Wu Yin nodded, propped his cheeks, and looked out the window in a hoarse and melodious voice. After the victory, Makita, who was still a primary school student, suffered a disastrous defeat to the occasional Tezuka. Since then, his demands on himself have become increasingly strict, and he has finally climbed up to his current position. People, the more they understand defeat, the stronger they can become. That child is really interesting. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Training. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Training. Yukimura stood at the entrance of the tennis court for a while, still in a hands-wrapped position, with a gloomy gaze. He looked outside the court for a long time before reminding, that child didn't come today either. Makita, who was supervising the training of the department members, instinctively glanced outside, paused for a moment, and responded, a person who disrupts discipline is not qualified to join the Lihai Tennis Club. Yukimura smiled slightly and added, Akira hasn't come either. Looking at Makita, who suddenly fell silent, Yukimura couldn't help but laugh and ask, why aren't you talking? She has always been so lazy, it's not just once or twice, said Jintian after turning her direction and pausing for a moment. Yukimura smiled even brighter and said calmly, we've been friends for so many years, what's the point of openly favoring her? It's just that she's too biased, that's why she's becoming more and more relaxed. Makita frowned, as for the first grade. He has qualities, it's a pity to abandon him. Child. Wu Yin placed the pie next to Chihara, propping up her chin, and asked, do you need my help? Chihara Akira was also scared and suddenly jumped back several steps. She looked at the senior sister who suddenly appeared at her secret base in a daze and said in a panic, what are you doing here? Judging from the way you bury your head in practice, it's actually quite fun. Wu Yin pushed the pie towards him, his usually plain face showing a little more laziness. Last time I saw you walk a few pieces of pie, I tried making some. Do you want to come and give it a try? Did the senior sister do it? Chihara couldn't help but retract her outstretched hand and hesitated as she looked at Wu Yin, feeling that these few pies were just a New Year's greeting from a weasel to a chicken. These days, he didn't disappoint his words at the time. He found a dock at the beach to dock an abandoned ship, and every day after school, he practiced his basic skills nearby. He was always ready to go back and find those three monsters to settle accounts with. Therefore, even this kind-hearted senior sister was his enemy at this time. Fu Yin opened the box without hesitation, and a faint fragrance suddenly wafted out, slowly melting into the salty sea breeze. Let's take a break. She casually found a place to sit down and pushed the pie in front of Chihara. My craftsmanship is even highly praised by Marui. Chihara stubbornly turned her head away, her delicate face turning red under the sunset. Wu Yin seemed to recall that after the first match between Makita and Yukimura, Makita, who had narrowly lost, had this expression on his face. At that time, Makita was still very cute, somewhat arrogant and unwilling to give up, until he lost to Tezuka. But since then, his route has become increasingly crooked, gradually turning into the now stern and inhumane appearance. Take a closer look, Chichiya Chihara is afraid that he will become a great player in the future. Perhaps it was because of his love for his former wife, Makita, that Wu Yin looked at the gradually setting sun and slowly spoke up, these days, you have been practicing very hard on your own. But if you don't understand the styles of the three of them and focus on their weaknesses, how will you defeat them? Chi was no longer confused and felt the implied meaning behind the words of Wu Yin. She was immediately surprised and said, what does senior sister mean? I've been looking down on those three for a long time, too. Wu Yin brushed her hair behind her shoulder, her gaze burning. I'll help you. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Challenge letter with multiple mistakes and omissions. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Challenge letter with multiple mistakes and omissions. It's been another week without training in the mist, and Makita's face is so black that it can drip ink. If you're really angry, just go find her. Yukimura became accustomed to being alone when he was young, and chuckled lightly. If it's not good enough, you can ask Prince Renwang and Marui and others for help. She's confident on her own. Makita shook his head slightly, his expression serious, even a bit solemn. He lowered his head and pondered for a moment before saying, the thing that Fuin told us before. Well, she's already verifying. Yukimura understood, and her usually gentle smile became more meaningful, her voice slowly lowered. Dare to embezzle our national championship prize money, there really is such a bold person. They are not short of money, but that doesn't mean they are willing to be the scapegoat of giving away wealth to others for nothing. If this matter were to be found in other tennis teams, it should not have been discovered. But who would have thought that the finance manager of the tennis department was Wu Yin? Born into a wealthy family that has been in business for generations, she has been very sensitive in this regard since birth. Moreover, although Wu Yin is very wealthy, she has calculated every penny of the tennis department's funds very clearly. For those who dare to embezzle funds, her methods are not gentle at all. Yukimura still remembers that when the first-grade students first entered school, the three of them challenged the third-grade main candidates in the tennis department, promising to win and become the main candidates. However, at that time, the senior students in the third grade wanted to repay their debts. It wasn't until the afternoon of that day that a video of the senior students in the third grade of the tennis department breaking their promise after a disastrous defeat spread throughout various class groups. Not only did the first and second grade students start speaking out indignantly for justice, even some third grade students began to criticize this behavior of being senior students and suppressing younger generations, which made it exceptionally smooth for the three Yukimura to become the main candidates and even the head of the tennis department. Upon careful consideration, it is likely that there will be a boost from the hidden fog behind this. Although she has always been lazy and sleepless, her rational upbringing from a young age has made her even resort to any means for the sake of her goals. Although this has made her strength recognized enough, it has also resulted in very few close friends around her. Yukimura and the others have become extremely precious to her. Suddenly, there was a slight commotion outside the classroom. Makita didn't care about other people's gossip, but suddenly, a crumpled envelope was slapped on his desk by a small hand. Without even waiting for him to look up, a childish voice proudly declared. Come to the tennis court at 3 p.m. this afternoon, don't try to escape. Jintian has a strict personality, and no one in the class dares to speak to him like this. For a moment, everyone's gaze was drawn to this ignorant child. After finishing speaking, Che Yuan-chi ignored the eyes of the three senior students and walked out of the second-grade classroom with a fierce and unrecognizable pace. Yukimura raised his eyebrows, hesitated for a moment, and suddenly let out a hiss. His smile bloomed and he asked, "This is not possible. Is it the handwriting of Takayuki? What has she been doing these past few days?" Lu Lianer was also very helpless. Although she knew that Wu Yin was very picky, her ability to deceive other children into doing so was also unique. Jintian remained silent, but after opening the challenge letter, he suddenly froze and his hands trembled slightly. The handwriting in a letter is crooked and full of grammar errors. Apart from the name Chiyu and Chiya, almost none of them are eye-catching. The process of this child being admitted to Lihai University affiliated middle school must have been very touching. Jintian frowned suddenly. Too relaxed. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Challengers and Rumors. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 Challengers in Rumors. The news that the three ace players in the second grade of the tennis department had been challenged by the first grade spread throughout the third grade at noon on the same day. Upon hearing this news, Wu Yin almost splashed the sodium sulfate used in the experimental class onto Marui Wentai's hand. Wow! Where do you find me unhappy, Moon? Just tell me, there's no need to shut up, right? Marui Wentai suddenly jumped a few meters away and looked at his teammate, Wu Yin, with grievances. Wu Yin glanced at him, picked up the remaining substances on the table, and calmly replied, sodium sulfate is a low-toxic substance. Low-toxicity substances are also toxic substances. Marui Wentai still looked at her vigilantly, her hands crossed in a shape on her chest. Kazuki, you and I just don't want to fail, we just don't want to fail. You come back, Wu Yin said with a lazy expression. My dissatisfaction with all of you will persist until the national competition ends, so please don't worry, you are safe now. Marui Wentai returned to Misty Yin with suspicion and watched as Misty Yin calmly carried out the operation. He whispered, I heard that kid personally went to second grade to provoke Vice Minister Zhenda. Is that a rumor? It's probably true. Wu Yin spoke calmly and silently moved his eyes away. These days, she has been wholeheartedly accompanying Chihara Akira to train with all her might towards defeating the three giants of Tachibana. Every day, she is plotting to pull the black-faced deity from the altar of the three giants. Chihara Akira is also very interested and talented. Although Wu Yin does not believe that he can defeat Makita at this time, she cannot let this child continue to leave the team and train on his own. Let Makita and his team see the potential and progress of Chihara Akira, and they will definitely not waste this good seedling. But she didn't expect that Chihara Akira would even directly take the challenge book onto the Jintian table. He's done. It's dawn, dig him 2 more shovels of soil. Wu Yin showed a pitiful look in his eyes. Upon seeing this, Marui Wen suddenly understood something and looked surprised, saying, It can't be you. Wu Yin nodded. I just said, why haven't you seen anyone during this period of the month? It turns out you're going to stir up trouble. Marui Wentai suddenly realized and then put on a look of watching a good show. Have your personal grudges with the deputy minister finally begun to affect innocent people? Wu Yin gently pressed her temples and sighed, please don't say things that are so easily misunderstood. I am very serious about opening a small stove for student Chiyuan. Upon hearing the word open a small stove, Marui Wentai exclaimed in admiration, that child is really enviable. Wu Yin began to fill out the experimental report paper and said, however, with such a reckless nature, Chihara might really like it. Will the deputy minister like it? Marui Wentai, who is completely indifferent to chemistry, asked curiously as she lay flat next to her. Wu Yin's writing speed paused for a moment, pondered for a moment, and then said, your current generation of players is too rebellious. There is a gap in level with the younger generation, and it is difficult to continue. If there are no qualified younger generations, the dominant position of Tachibana University will only be in your 3 years. Yukimura and his team are persistent in Tachibana's 3 consecutive championships, but in fact, their true ambitions are even higher. As a child, Chiya Chihara is the hope of the next generation. It should be more than that. Marui Wentai smiled. Whether the deputy minister likes it or not, he can't tell, but in February, he must really like that child. End of this chapter.